Hello and welcome to another session of Reading with Clyde. I'm reading a passage from Thānissaro Bhikkhu's Affirming the Truths of the Heart. This is based on the Buddhist teachings of Samvega and Pasada. Samvega was what the young Prince Siddhartha felt on his first exposure to aging, illness, and death. It's a hard word to translate because it covers such a complex range. At least three clusters of feelings at once: the oppressive sense of shock, dismay, and alienation that come with realizing the futility and meaninglessness of life as it's normally lived, a chastening sense of our own complacency and foolishness in having let ourselves live so blindly, and an anxious sense of urgency in trying to find a way out of the meaningless cycle. This is a cluster of feelings we've all experienced at one time or another in the process of growing up. But I don't know of a single English term that adequately covers all three. It would be useful to have such a term, and maybe that's reason enough for simply adopting the word Samvega into our language. But more than providing a useful term, Buddhism also offers an effective strategy for dealing with feelings behind it. Feelings that our own culture finds threatening and handles very poorly. Ours, of course, is not the only culture threatened by feelings of Samvega. In the Siddhartha story, the father's reaction to the young prince's discovery stands for the way most cultures try to deal with these feelings. He tried to convince the prince that his standards for happiness were impossibly high, and at the same time trying to distract him with relationships and every sensual pleasure imaginable. To put it simply, the strategy was to get the prince to lower his aims and to find satisfaction in a happiness that was less than absolute and not essentially pure. If the prince were living in America today, the father would have other tools for dealing with the prince's dissatisfaction, but the basic strategy would essentially be the same. We can easily imagine him taking the prince to a religious counselor who would teach him to believe that God's creation is basically good and not to focus on any aspects of life that would cast doubt on this belief. Or he might take him to a psychotherapist who would treat feelings of Samvega as an inability to accept reality. If talking therapies didn't get results, the therapist would suggest or prescribe mood altering drugs to dull the feeling out of the young man's system so that he could become a productive, well adjusted member of society. If the father were really up on current trends, he might find a dharam teacher who would counsel the prince to find happiness in life's little miraculous pleasures: a cup of tea, a walk in the woods, social activism, easing another person's pain. Never mind that these forms of happiness would still be cut short by aging, illness, and death, he would be told. The present moment is all we have, so we should try to appreciate the bittersweet opportunity of relishing but not holding on to brief joys as they pass. It's unlikely that the lion hearted prince we know from the story would take to any of this well meant advice. He'd seen it as propaganda for a life of quiet desperation, asking him to be a traitor to his heart. But he found no solace from these sources. Where in our society would he go? Unlike the India of his times, we don't have any well established, socially accepted alternatives to being economically productive members of society. Even our contemplative religious orders are prized for their ability to provide bread, honey, and wine for the marketplace. So the prince would probably find no alternative but to join the drifters and dropouts, the radicals and revolutionaries, the subsistence hunters and survivalists consigned to the social fringe. He'd discover many fine minds and sensitive spirits in these groups, but no accumulated body of proven and profound alternative wisdom to draw on. Someone might give him a book by Thoreau or Muir, but their writings would offer him no satisfactory analysis of aging, illness, and death, and no recommendations for how to go beyond them. And because there's hardly any safety net for people on the fringe, he'd find himself putting an inordinate amount of his energy into issues of basic survival. With little time or energy left over to find his own solutions to the problem of Samvega, he would end up disappearing, his Buddhahood aborted, perhaps in the Canyon country, perhaps in the Yukon forest without trace. Fortunately for us, however, the prince was born into a society that did provide support and respect for its dropouts. This was what gave him the opportunity to find a solution to the problem of Samvega that did justice to the truth of his heart. The first step is that solution is symbolized in the Siddhartha story by the prince's reactions to the fourth person he saw on his travels outside of the palace. The wandering forest contemplative, the emotion he felt at this point in term pasada, another complex set of feelings usually translated as clarity and serene confidence. It's what keeps Samvega from turning into despair. In the prince's case, he gained a clear sense of his predicament and of the way out of it, leading to something going beyond aging, illness, and death, at the same time feeling confident that the way would work. As the early Buddhist teachings freely admit, the predicament is that the cycle of birth, aging, and death is meaningless. They don't try to deny this fact, and so don't ask us to be dishonest with ourselves or to close our eyes to reality. As one teacher has put it, the Buddhist recognition of the reality of suffering, so important that suffering is honored as the first noble truth, is a gift in that it confirms our most sensitive and direct experience of things, an experience that many other traditions try to deny. From there, the early teachings ask us to become even more sensitive to the point where we see that the true cause of suffering is not out there in society or some outside being, but in here, in the craving presence in each individual mind. They then confirm that there is an end to suffering, a release from the cycle, and they show the way to that release through developing noble qualities already latent in the mind to the point where they cast craving aside and open onto deathlessness. Thus, the predicament has a practical solution, a solution within the powers of every human being. It's also a solution open to critical scrutiny and testing, an indication of how confident the Buddha was in the solution he found to the problem of Samvega. This is one of the aspects of authentic Buddhism that most attracts people who are tired of being told that they should try to deny the insights that they inspire their senses of Samvega in the first place. I'm going to stop here for now because I don't want to get too much into uh, the Buddhism part. There's always going to be extraordinary circumstances that are going to test us to are we going to be patient? How do we handle it? Things that come out of the blue, that you don't expect these things. How do we deal with these situations? How do we find that peace? And until you are at peace inside, you're never going to be able to handle these situations. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Reading with Clyde. Till next time, see you. Bye bye.